Hello and welcome to Solar Development with Community Energy. I'm Bobby Safransky, the Events Director here at Clean Air Council, and I'm excited to welcome you to one of many events in the 2020 virtual Greenfest Philly presented by Toyota Hybrids. If you're not familiar with Greenfest, it's the area's largest environmental festival celebrating all things sustainable for the past 15 years. This year, the event is entirely virtual with live interactive programming scheduled through this Sunday, September 27th. So you still have a few days to see some great programming. You can see everything that we've currently had, the recordings of all the webinars, including today's webinar, at cleanair.org/greenfest, and you can see the schedule for everything still to come. Clean Air Council is a member-supported organization working to protect everyone's right to a healthy environment. Our over 8,000 members bring their passion in the fight for better environmental health protections and are key to our ongoing work to protect public health and ecosystems. You can find out more at cleanair.org. But we need you. We need you with us taking actions on alerts. We need you giving us feedback on our programs, and we need you spreading our work through social media. Finally, please consider making a donation. I will post a link in the chat for anyone that wants to sign up and become a member or to find out more about our work. We do have Janine Murphy here from Community Energy, and Janine is so kind to offer to do a quick Community Energy intro.
Thanks, Bobby. So just giving a brief intro about Community Energy. So Community Energy has been addressing climate change with cutting edge innovation for over 20 years and bringing new renewable power at scale with projects developed across the country. And over the years, Community Energy has partnered with many large companies, utilities, and communities to get projects built, and has a successful track record for the company and for those communities. As well, Community Energy is a trusted partner of many organizations for their sustainable goals in order to meet those annually. And Community Energy is always leveraging new technology to support the goals for decarbonization efforts in order to address the challenges of climate change that we're all in. So thank you.
Thanks, Janine. Well said. Brent, welcome.
Good morning. Good to join you. Sorry, I'm a few minutes late.
Oh, it's okay. We've been hanging in there. How are you doing this morning?
Doing well. It's good to see you.
Yeah, likewise.
Good to see you. What have you covered so far? There's a lot to talk about with Pennsylvania, climate change and solar. Glad to be here.
Janine just kind of scratched the surface about who Community Energy is and what you guys do. But otherwise, it's fair game. I'm excited to hear about the solar industry, where we're at now, and hopefully where we'll be in the near future.
Great. Maybe starting from Pennsylvania's vantage point. The big picture goal for all of us is what can we do to mitigate climate change with a clean power sector? And the power sector is one of the biggest segments, and it's certainly the place to start. And really, the goal we ought to be looking at is how do we get to 80% carbon reduction by 2030 out of the power sector? So the International Panel on Climate Change says that we should get to 50% carbon reduction by 2030 across the whole economy. But the power sector is not only one of the bigger players, but it's one where we can address climate and carbon decarbonization really very economically. And I think maybe that's the untold story, that we can get reductions in carbon and clean power and actually save ratepayers money. That's the shift in the economics over the last several years. And that's because the costs of solar and wind, but particularly solar, have come down so far in the last 5 years, but 80% cost reduction in solar over the last 10 years means that you can retire coal, frankly, and use the remaining gas to back up solar as we ramp up solar and lower the cost of energy. And that's what's really not being implemented very quickly. Those changes aren't being implemented very quickly in Pennsylvania or elsewhere. Just real quickly, I heard a utility looking at its forward planning in another state recently that was confronted by these arguments that, you could retire your coal plants and put in a lot of solar, back it up with the existing natural gas, you don't have to do new natural gas, and save your ratepayers money. And it was a very frank conversation where the utility representative just said, we know we could save ratepayers money by doing that, but it would hurt our shareholders. So that's the kind of discussion that we have going on. And that is, there's a lot of capital invested in these old coal plants, and there might be less capital to be invested in solar. So those are the kind of economic, call them trade-offs or deals that need to be structured over the next 5 to 10 years to get more renewables online. And then I can get your thoughts on that and talk quickly about what that means for Pennsylvania. We really can get low-cost solar in place, but we're not doing that we're doing it at a very slow pace in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, is that also partially having to do with the government subsidies that make the fossil fuel industry so profitable?
There are more subsidies on the fossil fuel side than are usually admitted, but the real thing is replacement of the capital. So like I said, there are coal plants in Pennsylvania that have a lot of capital invested that are earning a rate of return for their owners. And even though replacement of those coal plants could lower energy costs because you have much lower cost solar, renewables, and gas, the natural momentum would be for those investors to hold on to those coal plants to pay them off over the next 15 years. So what I think is interesting are the kind of bargains that you're seeing in some other states, Colorado and others, that have said, look, we will save hundreds of millions of dollars for ratepayers by retiring that coal plant now because it's expensive. And because you have unamortized costs and capital invested, we will pay the utility or the plant owner some portion of the savings to buy them out, essentially, of their unamortized capital. And so those are the interesting things that we'd like to see in Pennsylvania. Real quickly on the amount of solar in Pennsylvania, our portfolio standard in Pennsylvania is pretty weak on solar. It says that we'll do 0.5% of our load, right, from solar in Pennsylvania, and neighboring states. Maryland has 15%, New Jersey on renewables overall, it's at 40-some%. So it's really a little too easy for Pennsylvania generation owners to do nothing, to keep driving that old coal plant, And so that's really what we need is some economic basis to invest in the new, save money, and retire the old in Pennsylvania.
We do have a question in the chat from Carl, and I want to remind everyone that they can throw questions in the chat for Brent here, and I'll keep an eye on it and try to pose them to Brent. So Carl says, I know that briefly solar reached grid parity with natural gas. Now that solar is large scale, is economically viable. Can you speak more about some of the other obstacles to adoption? And what is in view what's your view, for the biggest obstacle, political will or inertia or something else?
It's really good, really astute. It's a question we all need to ask, right? So if the economics are here and we can not only get clean energy, but more economic energy, what's in the way? And there are a couple of things. Policy is probably number one, but the market design is right behind that. So in Pennsylvania, we have competitive electricity markets, right? Which are generally thought to be a good thing to lower the cost of wholesale energy because each generator that comes online, each new generator has to compete in the wholesale energy market. One of the market failures is that wholesale energy market puts out or will give you a firm quote for energy prices for 3 years. 3 years down the road, you can count on it. If you build a generation plant, you'll know you can lock in prices for 3 years. And for plants that are based on fuel, that may be fine because fuel goes up and down. It'll change in the market over 3 to 4 years. But for solar, all your capital is spent up front. There's no fuel, right? So you need a 25-year return. It's much like building a house. If you have a 30-year mortgage, you can decide whether you can build a house or not based on a 30-year mortgage or a rent payment or a mortgage payment. But if you had to pay for a house in 3 years and there's no 30-year financing available, there'd be no houses built. And federal policy has supported that through federal mortgage programs, et cetera. Well, on the solar side and renewables, to invest in new renewables, you need to have that capital in place and know that you can get 25-year return. So one of the market failures and one of the policy things is we need to get wholesale energy markets that support 25-year investments. And what that's going to take is it's going to take state policy to do it. It doesn't need to be for a portfolio standard, but it needs to be some policy that allows 25-year capital investments to be put on the same plane in terms of levelized cost of energy with a natural gas plant that's operating on a 3-year gas price. So Pennsylvania, I said, has a requirement of 5% from solar. That's about 400 and some megawatts of solar. That's the whole statewide requirement. And just in the last several years, the city of Philadelphia stepped up to purchase solar energy directly. University of Pennsylvania recently announced 220 megawatts. Penn State. Those 3 purchases alone come pretty close to matching the entire Pennsylvania state utility requirement for solar. So it just gives you a sense that we're way out of market on the economics. So policy, was that Carl? The question, policy is the number one. Pennsylvania needs to get into the 21st century on policy. Well, they probably actually need to get in the 20th century first, but we need to get up to date on policy. And the economics are there. That's the amazing thing. You could actually save ratepayer money by investing in solar at today's capital prices.
Yeah, we certainly are behind here in Pennsylvania. Although, so another question is, won't Reggie put coal power plants out of business anyway?
So Reggie is a good first step and a necessary step. The prices for carbon, Reggie, at the moment might be in, call it roughly the $5 a ton range. And that's enough to put an additional burden on coal vis-a-vis gas. It's not enough for some of the same market reasons I talked about to build new renewables because it's still a incremental short-term price impact. So if Reggie continues to ramp up the price of carbon, you'll not only accelerate retirement of coal, which it needs to do, but then you could also build some new renewables. What we really need, though, in the short term, call it 3 to 5 years with Reggie, is to address this long-term capital investment problem that I mentioned. So if you don't get parity in the market between solar, which is all upfront capital, and fuel-based resources like natural gas, if you don't have a way to equilibrate the capital, then you're going to get more natural gas. And yes, that's reduced carbon from coal. And the natural gas industry does a lot of what would you call it, reputational advertising on how they are reducing carbon. That's true compared to coal, but it's not enough to get to where we need to get to on climate change. It's incremental, and shifting from all coal to really predominant gas won't get you there. That's the new frontier, is how you get gas and renewables working together to get 80% carbon reduction, as I said.
Chris asks, in speaking about the depreciation of costs, to what extent are there still unadvertised or undepreciated costs of coal-fired power plants? Noting that if they're older than 39 years, the IRS depreciation period for non-residential property, he wouldn't expect there to be very many. So I guess speaking about the cost of building. Good and question. How, yeah.
Good question. And the amount of undepreciated cost, unamortized capital in each coal plant does vary widely. And you can discover those numbers with a little bit of digging. But it's not zero as you might think, because there are continual upgrade investments. And particularly through the era of scrubbers and particulate controls, there were a lot of investments that were controversial in some ways at the time. Environmental groups said that's probably stranded investments. If you're going to do a $100 million scrubber, and that's part of unamortized costs, yeah, you're going to help us on sulfur. You can do particulate. You're going to help us on particulate, but you're still going to have to address carbon. So most coal plants have remaining unamortized capital that came in through the years, not just on environmental controls, but continual replacements. It's almost like continually putting car parts into an old car, or a new engine. Now you got put a new engine in an old car. Now you got an unamortized capital cost of how you're gonna have to keep driving it to pay off the new engine, right? So each coal plant's different. Excellent question. Each coal plant's different.
We had an interesting question about PECO. Since PECO is not generating energy anymore, shouldn't they be supportive of long-term contracts for solar?
And PECO has been relatively supportive. We've been working on bills in Harrisburg for long-term contracts. And while there are some concerns by wires companies that you're referencing, like PECO, in terms of what does that mean for their books to have a 20-year obligation. They have to deal with that, much like debt. But it's a good commitment because you're getting flat price power that's never going to go up. So it makes economic sense. And there are some accounting concerns and credit concerns for companies that need to be worked through. But PECO's been actually very cooperative and supportive among the utilities in Pennsylvania at being willing to look at and support long-term contracts for solar. The bigger opposition, get right to it, in Pennsylvania has been the legislature in Pennsylvania has been controlled by conservative and leadership that is in the process of changing, we hope. And it's been very favorable to natural gas and fossil fuel generation. And so if you can't get the bill through committee in the Senate and House in Harrisburg, nothing's going to move. I think the governor would be supportive. I think PECO would be supportive if it's done right and has been. Other utilities, maybe less so. Certainly, First Energy has not been a big supporter, and you see what happened in Ohio. But overall, the economics are starting to leak through and push even conservative members of the legislature are starting to see this makes economic sense. So I'd say we're building momentum, and PECO has not been the obstacle. But voting, learning who you're voting for in the state house, in the state senate, might be the most impact you can have on energy policy in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, that's a very important thing to remember, and I feel like that point keeps coming across in throughout Greenfest. Is voting is one of the most important things to do, and it's just knowing who you're voting for, knowing what they stand for. That's how you and I can make change.
And when you work as you do, Clean Air Council has for years been effective in advocacy. If you work in Harrisburg, you really see it. It can block a lot of good action with just a few roadblocks in Harrisburg. So, but the tide's changing. I think across the political spectrum, the recognition that solar is not some high-priced green dream. It is a rugged, ready-for-action, cost-saving, scalable form of generation. That's the shift, really, in the last 3 to 5 years. We're now able to say that. So now we got to get that through in the politics. So any help we can all give that on election day is going to make a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
So we have a question about Delaware specifically. So Therm is asking, there are legislative efforts in Delaware to increase their RPS. Would you say New Jersey policy on solar is a good model for them to follow, or is there another state solar policy that they should look towards?
That's a pretty good question, Therm, because there's a shift going on there as well as a result of the economics. So New Jersey is looking at competitive procurement, long-term contracts, as you mentioned, for solar that may be just as important as increased REC or renewable energy credit prices, which is how the portfolio standards are implemented. So it's one thing, and portfolio standards are a good necessary first step to drive that percentage up. But then to take real advantage of lowest cost solar, I would say you're right that Delaware should look at competitive procurement or long-term contracting, as New York and other states have done, to get the best price. In New Jersey, who's been a leader, right, on certainly solar, will, I'm sure, be one of the first states to tell you that their REC prices were very costly. In other words, they paid a lot of premium dollars to get that solar on earlier. So now that the economics have shifted on solar, I think Delaware has a chance to not only do a portfolio standard, but to look how can it get that low cost solar in there and retire that coal earlier, rather than just paying a premium. And usually that means something like long-term contracts, competitive procurement, citing rollback tax laws, because solar, I don't know if it's well known, also pays more taxes in rural communities than the existing land use, farming and other uses. But there's often clean and green and other policies that make rollback of all those taxes on a farm, if you're going to put solar on, they'll prohibit it. So you want to tailor it. If you're rolling back the taxes, the tax breaks on a section of rural land that's used for solar, that works because that solar will pay more, 5 and 10 times more, both taxes and landowner payments, than the previous agricultural use. So that's the benefit to everybody. But if you simply make it roll back the whole 1,000 acres, then it stops it from developing. So there's a lot of policy in addition, Therm, to portfolio standard. Maybe not a lot. I'd say actually a few critical provisions that Delaware should look at in terms of long-term procurement and rural tax policy.
Another question came through from Carl, but I think you kind of answered it at least partially in there. I was asking about long-term contracts being seemingly the way to go. And does New Jersey have this in place, or is the main reason for solar thriving is SRECs and subsidies? But I think the important thing or the important part of the question that might not have been answered yet is what makes New Jersey so successful in contrast with PA. I guess in the long term is trying to think of a way for PA to kind of like catch up.
Yeah, that's it. And what's made it successful is simply politics, as you mentioned, and Clean Air Council knows well, has been a lot more favorable in New Jersey, more urban state, had more support over the years. But the first part of that question was New Jersey is just now looking at long-term contracting and competitive procurement, because that's where it can finally get the cost savings. So I would say states like Delaware, or particularly Pennsylvania, which have not had the political support to invest dollars early, and so we're behind, should probably leapfrog to the economic, because it's got a lot more politically tenable in Pennsylvania to talk about solar and carbon reductions when you're saving ratepayers money than when you're not, right? So I think the way to catch up for Pennsylvania is to jump on the new economics and lead with that policy. And like I said, New Jersey's actually just has a pending bill now to do long-term after having done the yeoman's work. They've done the real work on getting renewables. That's what helped bring the price down on renewables is states like New Jersey and California that implemented it early. So now, relatively easy for Pennsylvania to take advantage of those lower costs and, like I said, leapfrog to bigger numbers. So, Carl, I think it's good thinking. I think that's what Pennsylvania can do.
Another question. There's a growing opposition to natural gas expansion in PA. Does solar, give rise to or continue that kind of community opposition?
That's a great question. If I could say, this is why I have been and am a strong supporter of Joe Biden's presidential bid and policy. I think he got it just right. And that is, the studies we've done and others show that you can expand solar and back it up with gas with the existing resource. So I think Joe Biden talked about, look, let's finish the job, cap the old wells, move into the new economy, which is more renewables. And basically, you're not going to add a lot more gas. You're not going to add any. But there is still a ramp down and an interim role for existing gas. It can recover its unamortized costs and continue its jobs without expanding gas to ramp up around solar. And we've talked to the PJM about this. PJM is the operator of the regional grid in the mid-Atlantic, including Pennsylvania. And they basically said, yeah, we know that we've built a lot of transmission and it's very robust, and we built a lot of natural gas generation over the last 10 years. So there is enough natural gas resources to ramp up around greatly expanded solar without adding new gas.
And we have a question here about like personal solar generation. Is there a good resource to review that would show options / cost for flat roof homes like in Philly? This person is looking to see if there are good lightweight viable panel options that would allow for easy roof recoating every several years, and maybe something with decent tax breaks.
Yeah, I would look at that. I personally just did solar on a place where I live, which includes some outbuildings and farm buildings. And so I think the best I could do on that is refer you to a company like Solar States. And you may have talked to them already during this week. Just get them out there to give you, it's case by case, right? It's the orientation of your roof. And like you said, what are the long-term roof maintenance questions? Many times you want to have a fairly new roof if you're going to put the solar on, or consider doing it together. So I'd start with them. And there are other companies, of course. Exact Solar out to the northeast of Philadelphia also goes in the whole southeast region, as does Solar States Solar. That's really the way to do it, is get them out there. I know I did that, and it was, it's just, first of all, it's exciting. It's like, oh, it can be a generator. And what does it mean? Where do I put it? And there's nothing like going through a winter and a summer with air conditioning and heat, and seeing a basic utility bill that's like $5 or $10 as a customer service charge only, because you're powering it with solar. It's very exciting, as you know. That's probably old business for this viewing audience, but prices are better, so it's a good time to look at it.
And if I can jump in there, Solarize Philly is also a great program that I used to get solar on my house in West Philly. And they work with some of those same solar installers. And it's really easy to use, kind of the same thing. You inquire and they send someone out and they look at your roof, they look at the direction and everything. It makes it really easy. And it's a great program.
And there's no cost to have them come out usually, right? So
yeah, correct.
Yeah, you may as well get them out there. Yeah. Yeah, how do you like your system in West Philly? It's just really rewarding to have, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have, it's a relatively small house, so it's a small array, but it gets the job done. I mean, in the summer we had a lot of months where we were only paying for the delivery charge.
Service charge, right?
Yeah. I haven't yet figured out selling my RECs yet, but I've been holding on to them, so I know how many I have, but I haven't quite figured out the getting a broker to sell them, because I think that's the process.
There are brokers that will do it, yeah, and Solarize Philly, I'm sure, can put you up. Yeah, and I have gotten some rec checks in. There's something beyond the economics that's very satisfying. Of course, it's knowing that you're clean on carbon, but also there's something self-reliant about it that it's really, really rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely. We had another question here about solar panels, but it's more about Senator Yaw's bill on recycling solar panels. Do you know much about that bill, or if there's any merit for it?
Yeah, it's a very informed questioners here. I really like this. I do know about that bill. There was a hearing held on it that the two folks that were brought in by the bill sponsors, the way I would characterize it, both recommended against the bill. And that is because what the bill would do is put solar programs in with other electronic so-called waste that's designated for a particular recycling program. And that recycling program in Pennsylvania is not doing well. It's not operating well. It needs work. For electronic waste, that does need directed recycling. Like we do go through a lot of television screens, we go through a lot of iPhones every year. So that's what the bill's intent. It's not handling it well. But so the reason they recommended against it is, one, the industry is recycling. Solar panels are valuable, even after 25 years. They can be reused in other locations around the world. They still generate 50% of their output. And the materials themselves are valuable and recycled. And SIA came in with little containers of the site of the materials that are contained in it. It's, it's sand, silicon, glass. It's really very easily recycled. And there's existing industry programs to reuse first and recycle. Basically, I heard the testimony to say there's no problem. The industry is dealing with it. It's not a good use of the materials to put it into a recycling program if it can be reused first. And nonetheless, I think for some reason there's a little bit of momentum to keep that bill going. I would hope that it gets denied and terminated, because I don't think it's well-intentioned or well thought out. But that person that asked the question is obviously informed on it.
Seems like we have a lot of informed people on this webinar today.
Very interesting group. We need to get them sharing, I think. I have some questions for them.
Another question that came through, once the capacity does exist for PJM to have the grid to handle the high intermittent generation, is storage part of the plan ultimately? How do we deal with the duck curve?
Yeah, so a couple of things. As I said to a colleague recently, for better or for worse, in PJM, we are a long way from the duck curve because we have so little solar in the state. The duck curve happens when you have so much solar that you get, you get curtailed energy, overabundance of energy during the solar hours, and then you have to make it up in the later hours. And that's what's being referred to. The study we ran in PJM showed that for the at least next 5 or 6 years, you can add solar and ramp it up, like I said, with the existing natural gas capacity, so you don't get a duck curve. And we have 400 megawatts, I said, in the state right now. We ran 7,000 megawatts. What it would do if you went, almost 20 times what we have now, which, by the way, is a good 2030 goal to reduce carbon. That would be Pennsylvania's share of moving of solar. You need some other resources as well. You probably need some offshore wind, and storage will get cheaper and will come in to extend those solar hours. But believe it or not, you can add that 7,000 megawatts and ramp around it with the existing resource. And where I think it's actually going to go in storage is as storage comes down in price, the peaking generation in PJM, which is not the baseload gas generation, which generates most of the time. It's the combustion turbines that come on, 5 and 10% of the time only to meet the peaks. The question will be how many of those we can retire with storage or not have to build. So storage will definitely play a role on the economics as renewables go up. And I think it will get competitive with natural gas peakers, probably in the next 5 to 7 years. But you should be assured that you do not need to push storage or wait for storage prices, given where we are. That's the good and the bad news. We're so far down the curve on solar at the moment in Pennsylvania that we can add a lot of solar before we have to really worry about the economics of season extension, seasonal storage, and hourly storage. But it's a good question. It's coming on fast. Solar's coming on. Storage prices are coming down about the way solar prices did. So it's going to be an interesting grid of the future. But we don't need to wait for that. We got a way to catch up on the duck curve. What would be the inverse of a duck curve? That's, I think, what we've got going right now.
Well, while we wait for more questions to come through, did you have anything else that you wanted to cover that was not yet asked in a question?
I think the other thing for this informed group to know and feel confident about is the relationship of solar to farming and ag land, because that is where some of these large solar installations take place in the central part of the state. And opposition is always coming up with ways to try to oppose solar, so they would try to portray it as taking farmland, when in fact the opposite is true, and here's why. To get to climate change goals, about 1% of Pennsylvania farmland could conceivably be used to produce solar. And we're actually losing that about every 3 to 4 years in Pennsylvania. So it's, that's the first part is, but the most important part is 2 other pieces. One is the reason it saves farmland is its economics for the landowner are 4 to 5 times or more dollars per acre than from the farms that are in trouble trying to make it on conventional Roundup ready beans or corn or something else. They make $200 an acre. They can get $800 an acre or more with solar. So one, farms that are threatened, which many are, have an economic lifeline by doing some acreage in solar. And so I think that's an important message to get out there. But the last part, maybe it's the most important, is when we put those solar installations in, we put them in with I-beams or posts driven into the ground with a post drive on the back of a 350 pickup truck, much like fence posts. So you're putting a lot, from a farmer's perspective, putting a lot of fence posts across the property. And that's it, as far as the property is concerned. We don't grade or destroy the topsoil or take it off like other forms of development. And we don't use concrete collars. And we post a bond with the locality that after 25 years, the dollars will be there to remove it, pull those posts out, recycle the panels, like was mentioned earlier on the Y'all bill, which is happening in the industry, reuse, recycle, and then take the steel out of the ground. And interestingly enough, what's left, because you've had that land lie fallow with grass or fescue or something growing for 25 years, is you've done what we've known improves farmland the best, is you've let it lie fallow with deep-rooted material. So you're improving the organic content of the soil for 25 years. So you actually are guaranteed a return to improved farmland that cannot and won't be developed or sold off for a parking lot or anything else for 25 years. So to go from, hey, you're taking up farmland, to really get under the facts and realize that it's a farmland preservation tool that doesn't take taxpayer dollars because the investor pays the costs of the solar farm. So you're preserving that land without any cost of public dollars. And you're increasing local tax revenues, 4 and 5 times income to the landowner. So the relationship to rural Pennsylvania is part of the message that I'd like to have us really get out there. And when Farm Bureau and others learn of it, farmers, localities, tax authorities in the central rural parts of the state, they're universally supportive that this is just an excellent piece of rural tax and farm development. So I just want to mention that because we deal with that and these listeners will hear of it as well in their conversations. So I guess we have 2 points here, vote and know that you're on firm ground with the economics and rural beneficial relationship of expanding solar in Pennsylvania.
Now, are there any similar programs with like in Philadelphia? Like I know there are like community it's like community purchase solar where you can have a group of people that buy a larger array and then all kind of share it. But is there like, you know, if my block, say I have buy-in from everyone on my block, could I get just a huge array across all of our roofs?
Well, let's start with the community solar. Getting across the roofs is one way to do a large farm for a number of people, right? But it could be on a vacant lot somewhere, right? Or it could be on a rooftop somewhere else, you know, in the neighborhood or not, right? But the concept you're talking about for community solar has been adopted in other states. Basically, all that's needed is for the utility regulation to allow a group of customers to sign on and have it on their bill that they're buying electricity from a solar facility not on their property. So it's called community solar. And of course, what would you guess? That is pending in the Pennsylvania legislature. It hasn't yet been adopted. So it brings us back to the same thing. We need the Pennsylvania Community Solar Bill passed at the same time as we need the competitive procurement long-term contract bill passed. And both are there and gaining support. So there's hope. Yeah, that'd be an excellent concept in your neighborhood. And you may not get everyone on your block, right? Maybe you get 3, but you may get 6 from another block, right? So just being able to put it on get it on your utility bill for whomever signs up for that solar facility. Fairly simple concept. Should not be that difficult. And then the economics would be worked out by the investors, and they would let you know what they need to charge you, and usually it's at par or a discount, on par with what you're paying now. But it can be locked in for 25 years, so you know that portion of your bill that you're buying from solar, wherever it lands economically, whether you save a little or end up neutral, you're covered on that for a long time. So good question.
Well, thank you. I think if we don't have any more questions, you don't have anything else to add, I think we can call this a session. But do you have any like last minute? Obviously, vote is your one huge takeaway.
Well, we ought to give at least you'll vote and know that you're on solid economics. So when you address solar, it's worth saying that with you as the host, that the Clean Air Council has been a leader on this for so many years. I know on carbon tax, and Reggie, you're in there pushing that hard. And when we first looked 20 years ago at doing wind in Pennsylvania, east of the Mississippi, really, there was no wind energy. That's where community energy started, saying, hey, we think we can do wind energy, the economics are good. And then 10 years later, we said, hey, we can do solar energy, the economics are good. But when we started that, we said, we want to sign up customers. The first person we met with was Joe Minot at the Clean Air Council. And right from the start, we said, yeah, let's talk to PECO, let's get people to sign on. And what happened in Pennsylvania all that time ago was University of Pennsylvania, Carnegie Mellon, others signed on to buy wind at that time at a premium. And we worked with Clean Air Council to do those programs. The Phillies signed on, still are buying clean energy. And that's what resulted in the first wind farms being built in Pennsylvania. And translate that all these years forward to University of Pennsylvania and City of Philadelphia recently signing up for the largest solar farms in Pennsylvania by 7 to 10 times what was previously there. And you really see the kind of leadership both from the institutions in Pennsylvania, but I'd have to say, to acknowledge our host, Clean Air Council has been the forefront from day one. So thanks. That'd be my final comment in addition to voting.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. And I'm sure Joe also appreciates it. He loves getting accolades.
It's true. Well, he knows he's a power. But it's still worth letting people know.
Well, yeah, thank you. And if people are interested about Reggie and learning more about it, we did have one of my colleagues presenting on Reggie, I think on Wednesday, and that is definitely on our website. We have recordings of all these webinars, so you'll be able to see that. Robert is far and away an expert about Reggie, so he got a lot of good questions. He had a great presentation about it. So if people are interested, definitely check that out.
Is that Rob with Penn Future? Who is that?
Robert Ruth from Clean Air Council.
Ruth.
Yep.
Perfect. Perfect.
Yep.
Perfect. Perfect.
He knows
Like I
his
said,
stuff.
you guys are usually leading the way. Great. Well, thanks for the discussion.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here with us.
Yeah.
All right.
Forward
Enjoy the
to
rest of
seeing
your
you
day.
soon.
Yep,
Onward.
absolutely.
All right,
Thank
bye-bye.
you. Bye.